another two.
All right. Peace, everybody. Look, I was just telling my homie V that it's so bootleg in my house how I'm doing this because I have nobody helping me. I'm gonna try to work on that, but V knows all too well what it's like to just have to do stuff on your own. And also, it's negative like 12 degrees in Albany and gonna drop to like negative 20. So we're having problems because it's so cold right now. Okay, so everybody who watches me on Instagram, you know that StreamYard doesn't let us connect. That's why you're seeing us this way, and there's a little delay. I might just have to move this. Okay, we'll figure it out. And I'm not constrained by time. I mean, I won't keep V forever, even though I could. Peace, everybody. I'm Rosa Clemente. Everything's falling apart around me in my house right now. You know, I hope everybody's well. I'll talk to V about this too. I'm trying not to be like super paranoid, but this new virus of the strain has me like having mad anxiety right now. But with all that said, let's just bring him in. I'll give you the right bio and then we'll talk about how we've met and how many times we've been on the streets together. But V Bravo is a native New Yorker, yes, born and raised by way of Chile, who has documented hip hop, youth culture, and politics for the past 25 years. During that time span, he co-founded Stress Magazine and launched a series of music, media, and film production initiatives across public schools, jails, and prisons. And V was in and out of Rikers with a program, I want to say for like 10 years, or he could correct me on that. But he's actually one of the first people I ever saw going into this, especially Rikers. It's just a massive complex of jails and doing incredible work. And he has seen a lot of the brothers, and I'm sure some sisters, but a lot of brothers who he saw go in and were there when they were joining his classes or listening to him speak. I know he has seen some of them come out. So, you know, that's a full circle moment when you're doing this type of work and you start seeing the rewards of it, especially by people being released. And he also was at Tribeca Film Institute, where he served as the education director. V is currently in production with Primera, a feature-length documentary about the present-day social uprising in Chile. So, hey V, thank you so much for being here.
What up? What up?
What up? My favorite communist that's alive. Well, first, tell everybody how you're doing. You're back, so you're experiencing this crazy cold, but how are you and how's your family doing in the middle of all this crisis?
We're all doing very well, thank you. It's been a challenging time, I think, for us all, but I come from a family of people who are warriors, and we always look at the glass as half full. So myself and my immediate family have been applying ourselves and trying to make the best of the situation and thriving, right? Because, you know, we just don't want to kind of like reach like the border level. We want to rise above always.
Yeah.
So we're doing well.
No, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And you know, everything always has had or political movements, social movements in the world. Chile has always been center of them, either being part of the revolution itself, showing people, but also dealing with the effects of obviously United States imperialism and the dictatorship there, which was extra cruel as it has been in a lot of countries, but there was extra. And I was thinking about not only you, but I was also thinking about Rod and G and their family and their dad and family members who were tortured when Pinochet was the dictator there. But this started happening, 14 months ago, where this particular iteration of the continuing revolutionary movements in Chile.
Yes. So the short story here is that when Pinochet was taken out of power, there was this myth that democracy would return everything to a stable place. But with democracy came this neoliberal model, which was like, you know what, you can have all the things that Americans and Europeans have, but you're going to have to buy them. Oh, and you can't afford them, so you're going to have to get into a life of debt. And everything will be privatized: education, healthcare, pensions. And that became like the new reality for something like 25 to 30 years. And this past October 2019, they decided to like raise the fare of the subway system in Santiago. And the high school kids who already come from like a long legacy of like standing up and fighting for their rights took over like one train station, and it went from 100 to a few thousand kids. And then, in true Chilean fascist form, the president unleashed the military on 16-year-old kids. And at that point, I think the rest of the Chilean society was like, this doesn't feel right. I mean, this is a 16-year-old person protesting, you know, their right to get to school, and we can't afford to take the train because the fare just went up by 30 cents. And then you unleash the military with tear gas, pepper spray, you're detaining kids, you're torturing kids. There were incidents of rape. And at that point, there was a groundswell of people that took to the streets in the millions. And then that didn't let up for like a year, right? So we got there like maybe like a month after it started and began to document this revolutionary process that went from like, let's fight against this wage increase of 30 cents, but let's parallel that to 30 years of a neoliberal state that hasn't really afforded us any human rights or dignity. It's just given us access to like greater debt. And that quickly ballooned into this narrative shift where people had the eyes on the bigger prize, and people were thinking, you know, to really undo everything that we're fighting for, it cannot be done through reform. It has to be done through structural change. And where does that begin? In the Constitution that Pinochet wrote that put people in the 1% in power of everything, including the 7 families that own all of Chile's natural resources. So at that point, within 30 days, it went from like, think about it, from like protesting a 30-cent hike in the subway system to like, we want a new constitution. And the people have to write the new constitution. It's not going to be academics, elected officials. It has to be my grandma, your sister, you know, the man who sells apples on the corner. They have to like write the constitution. And lo and behold, that's what was accomplished this past October when millions of people went out and voted in favor of writing a new constitution. So if you want to talk about structural change, I'm very proud that it took us like a couple of decades, but we are one step closer.
No, I mean, it's the images are liberating, but also obviously the brutality of the military and all those other forces. But you know what? I'm also realizing I think I'm mad young, and then I'm like, no, you're not. And there could be younger people watching this right now that haven't heard of Chile, the dictatorship, Pinochet, the American involvement in that. So can you speak a little bit about that history?
Sure. So if, to anyone who's listening and anyone who, you know, pays attention to history, right, like in and around like World War II, there was an uprising across the entire world, right? Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, right? And Chile was one of those countries where people decided, you know what, we're no longer going to be, quote unquote, this banana republic where Europe and America comes in, they pay off a couple of politicians, they sell the land, they come extract natural resources, copper, timber, fruits. People were like, we're no longer going to have that. And they derived inspiration from Cuba, you know, Dominican Republic, right, Angola, like, you know, the Congo, and then Chile became this example where instead of like using sort of like revolutionary tactics to kick the imperial powers out, they put the pressure on their elected officials to do so. And lo and behold, there was a popular movement that elected a socialist government in the late 60s. And that socialist movement was anchored by Salvador Allende, who happened to be the health minister in the 50s. And Um, there's this famous like sort of like quote by Henry Kissinger, who in his biography spoke about the Chile problem. And in the 1950s, the head of Pepsi Cola went to the White House to complain about the health minister in Chile because he had launched a national campaign to get people to drink water as opposed to like, you know, soda, right? And that health minister was, you know, Salvador Allende. And at that time, Kissinger talks about how they were so engulfed in, you know, the Korean War, thinking about Vietnam, that they didn't really pay attention. And then lo and behold, the people elect Salvador Allende to be their president. And then he nationalizes the entire like Chilean economy. And at that point, it became a real problem for the United States because now the copper that was being used to support all the emerging IT companies in the United States was being fueled by Chile's copper mines, right? All the grapes, right? All the fruit that people were consuming in the US was coming from Chile, right? So you had natural resources to feed people, and you had the copper that was building the digital universe in the United States, and that those two industries had become nationalized. And what happens when you mess with American interests, right? They do two things. They either buy you, right? Offer you money and figure out who's for sale. And if you're not for sale, then they go to option two, which is the clampdown, right? And then the clampdown is like, well, if we can't buy the politicians, maybe the military is interested in working with us. We'll offer them all the toys that we play with, that we use in other wars. You can have all those toys, right? And then we'll put you in power. And that is what happened in 1973, the year that I was born. I was born within a month of the dictatorship. My family had to hide us from, you know, military, you know, military infiltration and attacks. And then over the period of like the next 20 something years, there was just a bloody dictatorship that was put in place by the Nixon administration, that was continued by the Ford administration. The only one that kind of fought against it was Carter, but Carter lasted 4 years. And then Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they were in cahoots with Pinochet. And then, you know, sadly for the people of Chile, they endured, you know, like horrific crimes. I mean, we're talking about like Pinochet, who idolized, you know, like Adolf Hitler. We're talking about someone who took pride in burying people alive, who took pride in like raping men, children, and women. And the country endured that. And then the long legacy of Pinochet is that he instilled fear in people. People were afraid to like walk and like look to the left and to the right. And that psychology has been undone by this new generation who is also paying attention to everything that is happening in France, in the US, right? In Puerto Rico, right? And they're saying, you know what, we have to rise above, and we're going to be fearless, and we're going to bring the fight to the system. And the system is elected officials, the police, right? The corporate sector, and we're going to fight and not let go of the streets. Chile held on to the streets for about 150 days. Imagine 150 days, right, on the streets with your neighbor next to you, right? And that created a psychology, a community, right, that understands like the value of like holding something together, claiming it and owning it, right? I think in the US, we're used to going out to protest and we say like, whose streets? But then we go home, right?
Yeah.
Then we go home, right? And then we don't really own the streets because some municipality owns the streets. But it's a different thing when you have a mentality of occupy space, hold on to the space, and make that space a community. And I think there's been some elements in Portland, some of the Occupy, you know, initiatives here when, you know, folks took over City Hall in New York City, where you claim the land, you make the land yours, right? And it's symbolic, but it also sends a message, right, that we are aware of people power. And I think that I've been blessed to have been part of this, you know, uprising. I've documented the uprising, which is, you know, we can talk about it a little later. It's going to manifest itself in a feature film about, you know, like the folks who are leading this change. And, you know, I just feel like cool that I've been part of this process, and I know there's a lot of work to be done. Right now, Chile voted for the writing of a new constitution. This April, they're going to vote on the authors who are going to like write the Constitution. It's an opportunity to like for a country to ask itself, well, how do we define dignity? How do we define equity? How do we define equality, right? And then the fun part of like writing it, right? And then think of like the opportunity for a country to ask itself, what is our foreign policy going to be like, right? Like, what type of relationships do we want to have, right, with the rest of the world?
Yeah.
And I think that's just like a dope place to be at. You know what I'm saying? That's the stuff that many of us dream about, right? Like writing a social contract, right, that defines how we're going to relate to each other. So, you know, it's pretty awesome, you know.
No, you know, I was thinking from Puerto Rico to Chile to Nigeria, there is a consciousness, but it's also the brave young folks, the ones that are breaking all types of binaries, identities of politics. I mean, the identity politics, which is like something I work on, but understanding more that it's not visible representation doesn't mean that person is in your camp or with you. But those parallels are deep because in Chile rewriting their constitution, Puerto Rico has been having people's assemblies, a model that comes out of Latin South America, the continent of Africa. And we see young people literally having to fight people who really look like them in Nigeria. But you've been going back and forth while these summer protests happen. And, you know, I think it's hard for a lot of people to admit, like, yes, these protests this summer were powerful, but they was, for the most part, either asking white supremacy to be like, hey, just like me, don't kill me, leave me alone, or still geared towards reform, where like, right, in Chile, they're rewriting a constitution. And it's over, like somebody, when it was going down, my dad was like over 30 cents. I'm like, that's not the point. I'm like, first, that 30 cents means something real different in other countries than it does in the United States. But it's just at some point, the people, young people particularly, are going to push back in this world of neoliberalism, capitalism. And honestly, like even the last couple of days, because you said at the beginning around looking at all these systems and what happens when you really fight for infrastructure or mess with the system. This whole stock thing with GameStop and Reddit, and at first I didn't understand it. Then I spent the last 2 nights reading, and I'm like, the stock market, like, I don't know anybody but older folks that have even pensions, 401ks. But the way that Robinhood came in and the Wall Street elite, all of them came in to shut it down, because then you just have regular, mostly, yes, white millennial men, but they shook up that whole infrastructure of not just capitalism in America, worldwide capitalism and banking systems. And I'm like, they were just making some extra money, but y'all felt the need to shut them down, right? Because that hits at the system, even though their politics on Reddit are Trump politics. Yeah. So when you've been going back and forth, was it like, oh, this is dope, and then you're in Chile like, oh, this is what revolution looks like, and this is what a brutal response
I mean,
like.
I think one of the takeaways for me, and I've been thinking about this for years, is that, you know, in a first world paradigm, you know, capitalism affords you aspiration. So you may be poor and broke, right, and be part of like the 98% that doesn't know anything, but they still feed you this narrative, right, from the minute you go enter school, you enter the workspace, that if you work hard enough, right, you can achieve it. And periodically they give you crumbs, right? They give you like access to credit, buy a car, you too can be a homeowner, right? And then we begin to see ourselves on television, and then we say to ourselves, okay, things are changing, right? Identity politics. I see someone that looks like me hosting a TV program, and I think this creates like a myth that somehow we've made it and we are part of the system. And then you go to the developing world, right? And the developing world is like a stepchild of the first world. And in the developing world, right, the whip is always there. The whip is like, you know what? There's a class system that's aligned, you know, and perpetrated by race. And you are going to be here and you're going to stay here, right? And if you want any of this, you can't have any of this. And then when we offer you services, education, healthcare, we're going to tell you that you are undeserving. And I think that creates a different political identity around like you and the haves and the have nots. And I think that like people in developing worlds, right? Like in America, right? You can marry into wealth, right? You can be, you know, someone who builds a brand for themselves on Instagram. Shit, you could go to jail, be a rapist, come back out, you know, have like 1 million followers, and then you're in the bubble. You're hanging out with the bourgeoisie, right? But in the developing world, that doesn't happen because class, like people that hold on to the power, that are dependent on what happens in the first world, are not going to give the power up. And they're going to hold on to like military and police institutions to hold you back, right? It's just that clear. So when I was in Chile, right, and you know, I've traveled to other places in the world too, I realized that this was a movement to demand dignity. This was a movement to say, you know what, like we want to be treated differently. Our communities treat each other differently, but I want a different experience. And in wanting a different experience, people ask themselves, well, what is the root of this? Why do people like treat me like crap? Why am I being overcharged, right, for this, right? And then the little light switch went off and be like, the powers that be want to keep us in check. And then the analysis was like, well, how do we undo the power? And the undo the power wasn't going to be like, hey, you know, like hire a woman to like run the education department or like fire this person. No, it's that social contract that gives, you know, the elite the power to run the country. So then like people like were laser focused on going to the root. Whereas I think here we still need to do some of that work, right? And I've been thinking, why aren't we paying attention to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? If like communities of color have a history of being repressed by law enforcement, right? Why don't we kind of like put an amendment or do something to the rights that protects the rights of people of color against, right, repression from the police state? Why not just go for the jugular and make that a demand, right? Like, why settle for reform? It's 50 states. You're going to allow 50 different states to interpret their relationship to poor people in a different way, you know? Like, why not kind of like think of like massive, right, structural changes beginning in the contracts that we abide by, right? So I think that's what I got from Chile. And then keep in mind that I was documenting all of that. And then I left Chile in March and came into everything that was happening here in May. So I went from like one street to another street, right? And I was going back and forth, and it was like a cluster sort of like space that I was in where I was like, whoa, what is going on? And I realized that like narrative shift, right, is important insofar as you can actually get a win. And for Chile, they got a win. They got the win where the people voted and were like, we're going to write this motherfucker. We're going to rewrite the Constitution. And that has like trickled, you know, everywhere. And when you talk to young people like on the streets of Chile, and they tell you, and you ask them, what's the legacy of el estallido social, the social uprising? They tell you, you always have to be on. You always have to put pressure on the system, right? So it's this mentality that like, you're never going to settle for less. Whereas in the first world, right, you fight for something, you hit the streets, and then you get it, right? And then you go home, right? So even though like there's a vote on a new constitution, guess what? There's still 3,000 political prisoners who were not granted amnesty, right? And the people on the streets have not forgotten. So I got comrades right now on Friday who are on the streets fighting for the liberation of 3,000 young people who fought hard so people could have a vote for a new Chile, right? So it's this recognition that the work is not done. And if you're gonna kind of like assert yourself into the process, you need to have this mentality that the work is not done. And the work always needs to happen in the workplace, in your family, in the place of worship. And, you know, to me, that's been refreshing. I've been educated and I've come of age where there's always this start and stop cycle, right? You win something, right? You chill out, you go back to the drawing board, then there's something else that you fight for. But to be like in a place where it's continuous, right? It's like you're always surfing. Has been really like exhilarating. I'm still processing all this stuff. I welcome people that want to go to Chile and experience what is happening, right? Come one, come off, right? We need help. We need support. People are fighting through COVID. There's no stimulus check in the third world, right?
Right. Yeah.
People are unemployed. People don't have a pot to piss in, but they're hitting the streets. The frontline people who are fighting the police right now is the homeless community.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that, right?
Right.
The homeless community, right, have taken to the streets because they know firsthand, just like people here, they have faced repercussion from the state more so than anyone else. And they've aligned themselves with other folks. Now, the Chilean community on the street is also making linkages to the Mapuche community in the south. And the Mapuche community, which are the first people of Chile who fought the Spaniards and beat them, are fighting, multinational corporations who go to Chile to extract land, water, timber, right? And you have like that community finally aligning itself with like the popular movement in Chile. So when you go to Chile, you don't see Chilean flags, you see the Mapuche flag, because it's gone beyond national identity. When people talk about a new Chile, people aren't talking about like, hey, let's take the flag that the Spaniards gave us and let's start the reform from there. Nah, people are going beyond that. People are going and asking themselves like, who was here before any of us got here, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is requiring, people in this country that are progressive left, whatever means, not right wing and crazy and white supremacists. But still, I'm like, yeah, we're still way too dependent on elected officials. The more each day goes by, I'm like, this is the bullshit. This is all of a sudden the people in the system are going to be the ones that bring the systemic reform. So I hope that particularly younger people watching understand, not only do you stay in it, like freedom, as Angela Davis said, is a constant struggle, but we're just not here. Nobody, we're not asking for enough. We're not demanding enough. We're not asking for enough. And I understand COVID, like, yo, fam out there. I mean, I am the one that everybody's like, you're too paranoid, your anxiety. And I'm like, yeah, because my husband's out there every day working. My daughter, like we're understanding more now that there are some school districts that are trying to really fast track kids going back because suicide rates are high. In fact, where a lot of my family lives in Las Vegas, they all went back because they had like 7 suicide of young people in 1 week over this lack of, I don't think it's contact, that it's human contact, so I'm like, we need to be watching what everyone else is doing and what it means to be committed to revolutionary change. Like, revolutionary change doesn't come out of any of these systems, including filmmaking and entertainment. So I'm wondering, because you've been a filmmaker over 30 years, and more an activist, you've been part of mad movement struggles, documenting them. You were at Tribeca. Is there now more of understanding around not only our own narratives, that at the end of the day we end up making the best documentaries? Like, what was it, or not really? Or you haven't seen too much of that change, as opposed to talking about this industry of documentary filmmaking saying one thing but still not funding Black and brown folks?
I mean, you know what? Like, I have mixed feelings about all of this because at the end of the day, like, I'm a filmmaker, and that's a tool, but I'm not making films because I want to become someone that I'm not. Like, I'm not looking to like be rewarded as an individual and somehow like operate in a competitive space where I have to look at my peers and like try to like do better than my peers, right? For what? For the recognition. industry, right? And for what? I don't want to graduate into like a place that never wanted me to begin with, right? So like my mentality has always been, and this was ingrained by my mom, is that like you don't necessarily like look upward. You look to the side, to the left and to the right, and you look at the people that are next to you and the people that you belong to, and then you invest downward or sideways, right? You know, and that has been my motto. And you know, that's what's taken me back to the place where I was born. It's taking me back to like the streets. It's taking me back to people, right, who are like doing movement building by talking to people. You know, like you know, I'm not down for this movement building that happens behind a keyboard. I recognize its value, but at the end of the day, right, like there's something to be said about like looking at someone in the eye and asking them, hey, do you have my back, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, like on the battlefield, you build brotherhood and sisterhood. And I got to tell you, one of the most profound things that I've experienced as a man, you know, in his 40s, documenting the movement in my native Chile, is the movement is being anchored by women. And the thing that has been really, really like beautiful to be part of is that you see a younger generation of straight men being okay with being led by women. It's not like, oh, give the sisters a space. I think this generation finally has recognized the benefit of saying, you know what, we've tried with the dudes for like a long time, right? And it leads to conflict, chaos, competition. Like, let us ride with the sister, right? Let us kind of like ride with her leadership. And then I've seen how that's created opportunities for like a different level of engagement on the streets. I've been in situations where, you know, like things are about to pop off, right? And a woman enters a space and says, chill out, people, and facilitates, right, a conversation in the battlefield. And I've been in situations where when there is conflict internally, right, it can get ugly in 2 seconds. Right? Because people just get caught up in like being like the toughest, the baddest, right? And people begin to perform. And sometimes it's not about that. And I've seen how like, you know, valuable it is to have like a different gender perspective in the battlefield. And I think, you know, like we need more of that. And to your point about like the filmmaking industry, right? You know, the biggest commodity in the US is, you know, identity. It's who are you? How authentic are you? And can you place us in the vicinity of these people? And yes, as a filmmaker, you become a gatekeeper, right? But, you know, like, it's funny, like, I've been part of the criminal justice movement for some time, and there was all this activity around like closing Rikers. And I would go online and I would see pictures of people getting arrested outside of Rikers. And I would be like, that's not the point. The point is like to liberate people, not to like take a picture of yourself getting arrested. Like that's vain. That's like, it's counter-revolutionary. It's like placing yourself at the center of the story and essentially saying, look at me, I am the freedom fighter. Freedom fighting has never been about one individual. It's been about a populace. It's been about the liberation of a collective people, right? And I don't know if there's anything that we can undo in America, because I think it's a hyper competitive system. It's ingrained since day one. People need to make choices about getting the best grades. People need to make choices about getting into the best college. People start competing to get into the best work environment. People compete over foundation money. You know, people then start performing for people. People start doing like the dog and pony show, right?
Yeah.
And I asked myself, how does all this activity and behavior lead to revolutionary change?
It doesn't. And it doesn't. I mean, rhetorically, you already know it doesn't. And that's, but what you just said about competitiveness, I've been really trying to figure out why, for me, the last couple of months, I mean, again, everybody's got mental health stuff, seasonal depression, but like a couple weeks ago, I was downer than I ever felt before. So I was like, what's going on? You know, like check in, take a moment to think. And what came up for me was like, yo, I'm not trying to compete with people. first, I've never been that person that's mad ambitious to get to the next level to do that. But I did find myself, because of social media, right, partly, being like, oh, well, I should have been on that panel or whatever. And I was like, yo, this is too toxic. Like, and it's not in my nature to be competitive. Like, I want everybody to win, and I really mean that. But that's not how any of this responds. And what is frustrating, it is around so-called left progressive people that are treating each other, honestly, the worst I've ever seen. Just undercutting people, erasing people, um, being like, yo, take this connect. I can't be the only one doing this certain work. There's other people doing it. Then have somebody else, bring up somebody younger, mentor people. And I was like, yo, I need to like, I'm at the point where I'm like, I got to take a real step back in terms of that visibility and quote representational organizing and activism, especially online. But really just for like my mental health, I'm like, I'm not that chick. I don't want to compete with my brothers and sisters. I want all of us who have the right politics and doing the right work to be centered. So that is very American capitalistic, right? Because if your movie can't win an award or you can't be recognized by ticket sales or whatever, did you really make the movie? Did you really make a difference? That's what the system puts on us.
I hear you, and for me as a filmmaker, I've been blessed that we've put together like a really great team of storytellers for this project, and we've gotten some traction in terms of funding, and I'm thankful for the institutional support that I've gotten as a filmmaker at this stage in my career. But I don't move competitively, right? Like the minute that I do well, I want to share that. And filmmakers ask me, hey, how did you do? I'm like, I'm willing to like share a proposal. Like I'm willing to share tips. Like I want to put other people on. Like I don't want to be the only person that's making a movie about Chile. Like right. I support other people that are making stories, right? It's like we need more. Like I don't feel like the necessity to like be the be all end all. Like when I'm documenting, like things on the street, like I'm not pushing another photographer out the way. I'm not telling people get out of my shot. I'm like, yo, can I help you? Like here, can you help me? Right? It's like the objective is more like expand the perspective, invite more people to the party. And in America, we have like this thing is like you want to create a VIP treatment the minute that you get in. It's like you get in and everybody stay the fuck out, right? And I ask, how is that revolutionary? How does that bring like systems change, right? It doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And it comes back to like individual behavior. It comes back to like, some like good parenting, like understanding what solidarity means, understanding what, like what it means to have a cultural communal investment, in people. And listen, I'm not trying to preach and say like I'm perfect, right? Because I'm not, none of us are. Yeah. It's taking me a lifetime of like to get to this place where you fall, you do things sometimes that you didn't do in the right way. You have to like allow for the community to give you constructive criticism, right? You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable, right? There are things that I don't know, right? I'm struggling with things right now as a filmmaker, and instead of pretending that I'm gonna have the answer to like everything, it's cool to pick up the phone and be like, look, sister, look, brother, I don't know what to do here, right? I don't know what to do in this situation. I need your advice, right? But like in some places, that's sort of like seen as an element of weakness, right? Because we are taught to like, like have your shit together all the time.
Yeah, and like you said, the competitive nature of this American hyper-capitalism, when the hurricane happened in Puerto Rico, you were one of the first people that I reached out to, and you were so generous with your time. And you were like, the main thing is get down there with people, document it, but keep shaping, make sure you shape that narrative, and immediately coming back, as usual, from the most so-called progressive people, I'm getting critiques, like, why didn't you bring me? Or there's already a crew down there. I'm like, there should be 100. Like, like we can't cover the island of Puerto Rico, nor should we be the only ones. Like, I wish I had more money to bring more people in and then go and use this for your work and stuff like that. And having surrounded myself with younger people on the crew, I had to keep telling a couple of them, like, you can use this. You want to write an article, you're here. Like, I'm not going to charge you after we come back. But in their mind, they've been in that space where everything's a transaction,
Yeah.
as opposed to solidarity. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because yeah, I mean, I guess we are now getting older and like reflecting and being like, do I want to live this life like this, or am I going to let someone compromise what my ethics or values are to just get ahead or be visible? But I'm going to try to show part of the one of your clips. So as I told everybody, this is super bootleg because I have nobody helping me. My own daughter, who's in a film program, won't help me. Oh, and shout out to Youth FX. In fact, I gotta make sure I connect V to y'all. V, Youth FX up here. You gotta come when it's nicer and check out the amazing work that this brother Bowen, which you might have met Bowen. Well,
Yeah, he's you know, he's
thank you. When as an education director at Tribeca, I think you did. So let me try to do this, y'all. We're gonna try here. There's a lot happening.
Aquí o eres rico o eres pobre. Nosotros somos esclavos de un sistema. Un sistema capitalista.
Okay, so I need to put this here.
Yo creo que acá hay un derecho como ciudadano a mejor calidad de vida que nos merecemos.
Wait, I'm
como
not
chilenos.
sure if people can see it. Probably
Y
not.
eso es la lucha.
Wait a minute. Hold on, y'all. I just realized that not everybody's gonna be able to see it, but Instagram folks can.
Y toma esa decisión, ya conoce el actor de Carabineros, uno sabe que le pueden suceder cosas malas. Pero uno tiene que decidir como persona y como ser humano y como chileno si podéis vivir con eso.
Okay, everybody, if you're watching me on YouTube and that, I don't think you're gonna see it, but go to Instagram, and you can watch part of V Bravo's upcoming film. This is why I need help, y'all. Figure this out.
Yo no quiero que mis hijos vivan en una sociedad con desigualdad, con segregaciones. Quiero que ellos se sientan orgullosos de donde viven. Voy a seguir en la calle porque siento que tengo que estar ahí.
Mami, capucha, siempre en la lucha. Mami, capucha, siempre en la lucha. Mami, capucha.
Tengo que luchar con todas las personas que están ahí para cambiar este sistema. Un sistema que es patriarcal totalmente.
El pueblo, ¿dónde está? El pueblo está en la calle pidiendo dignidad.
No me siento parte de este país, me siento ajena en Chile. Y quisiera irme de acá, pero sé que tengo que quedarme.
Yo no me voy a quedar en mi casa. Y no porque quiera buscar la muerte. Yo amo la vida. Yo amo a mis hijos. Es porque va más allá. Y me di cuenta ya en la calle, en la primera, que no soy solo yo.
Ninguna democracia se puede levantar si termina primero con tanta impunidad.
Y si me tenían que pegar un balinazo, orgulloso.
Y hoy día somos nosotros, el pueblo. Y ese es el nombre que se le dio a la plaza, Plaza Dignidad. Es porque lo que buscamos es dignidad. Como trabajadores y como ciudadanos de este país.
Sale la Virgen, sale a pasear, el pueblo la viene a venerar, hace milagros en su pasar, mi Virgen de la montaña. Sale la Virgen, sale a pasear, el pueblo la viene a venerar, hace milagros en su pasar, mi Virgen de la montaña. Sale la Virgen, sale a pasear.
El día 18 de octubre yo andaba cantando en el metro. Y cuando llego allá, los estudiantes se tomaron la estación de metro donde yo me tenía que bajar.
La de hoy fue una jornada más violenta en esta semana de evasión que se ha presentado en varias estaciones del metro.
Sucedió la evasión, después Carabineros ingresó a las estaciones del metro y empezó a reprimir a los escolares, a los menores de edad.
Y los estudiantes empezaron a gritar. Evadir, no pagar, otra forma de luchar.
Estamos en guerra contra un enemigo poderoso, implacable, que no respeta a nada ni a nadie, que está dispuesto a usar la violencia y la delincuencia sin ningún límite.
Cuando yo escuché el término guerra, yo dije, esto cambió de color. Gracias.
Preferencia.
Mi hija me decía, papá, ¿qué pasa? No, le decía, están los escolares ahí alegando por la injusticia. Y le empecé a explicar, pues. Era la educación, era la salud, era el transporte, la vivienda, era el AFP, era el TAG. Y los chiquillos seguían protestando. Los días empezaron a seguir y las manifestaciones no decayeron. Pero lo que nos dimos cuenta es que cada vez que había una manifestación, la represión era más violenta.
¡No, estamos parando, mucha madre!
Vino el famoso llamado del señor presidente a los militares. Esa realidad era aún más violenta. Siguieron los días y el día viernes 8 de noviembre se hizo una manifestación. Ya se había entablado lo que era la primera línea. La primera línea era un grupo de jóvenes que decidieron defender a la masa, que estaba alegando por sus derechos, que no íbamos a permitir que los carabineros reprimieran frente a las demás y que nosotros íbamos a ser la línea de contención para que ellos se pudieran manifestar tranquilos. Todos los que estamos en la primera línea éramos de diferentes equipos de fútbol, éramos de diferentes barrios. Quizás en otra situación habríamos peleado entre nosotros, pero esto nos unió. Y en conjunto todos sabíamos por qué estábamos ahí y por qué no estábamos arriesgando, estábamos enfrentando a la policía. Porque atrás de nosotros había un grupo de personas que se estaban manifestando y que estaban luchando por nuestros derechos y por nuestra dignidad.
El uniforme uno solo. Lo lleve una paca o lo lleve un paco. Aquí a lo que se le perdió respeto es al uniforme. Para mí, primera línea.
Oh my. Oh, everybody. For those who couldn't see it, I mean, audio it was a really dope podcast already. V, yo, this is yo the I don't know who's your DP, right, or your cinematographer, but these shots, and you were there, like folks, like V was in it, like in it. It's crazy to see just this little bit right now for you, and how it's just beautiful and so inspiring.
I mean, I want to shout out the two story participants who are in that clip, Felipe and Angie.
Is Felipe one of the many? I don't know if people know that a lot of brothers and sisters um, was shot in the eye and lost their eye. Was he shot in a protest?
He lost his eye in the battle, and Felipe was not just a protester. Felipe is, since he's a welder, he had the role of like creating barricades so police would not infringe on the protesters. So he had a role in the street. It's not just going out there and throwing rocks. It's creating barricades so the tanks won't come in. And my homegirl Angie, who has a prominent role in that work sample, she is just one of the fiercest freedom fighters I've ever met in my life. So it's like I can't wait to share like their story with the world. We have a almost completed 90-minute film, and it's you're gonna get a sense of like everyday people and what everyday people will do, to like fight for freedom, but also create a new community, right? Because this isn't just about fighting cops. This is about envisioning a new way of like dealing with each other and demanding like a new sort of like a dignified way of like relating to the economy and the state,
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see it. I mean, first, everybody, you can see, you can hit up V on Instagram, and actually, V, give out some of your information because if folks want, I feel like immediate donation. Although I know you're in the midst of it, filming it, but like,
so one of the things that I do want to mention is that, well, if people want to know more, you can find me on Instagram. I'm really simple. Easy to find is my name, V Bravo, VEO. I guess I got lucky with that name, right? Wherever I go, it's there.
You're there.
And also, I can't reveal too much, but we are planning an exchange, an in-person exchange between movement leaders in the U.S. and some of the movement leaders in Chile. So again, the film is a tool to spark dialogue, but it's only one element, right? The real work, the true work is the work that we do as people when we come together and support each other, learn from each other, and create things together. And for that, we have to do that in person. So
yeah, put it on that list. I mean, you were kind enough to invite me as soon as this whole thing started. I mean, that you've been back and forth, and also to see the incredible work within this pandemic is probably something also our ancestors dropped on us, like, yo, you have a moment to maybe shift this tide or rewrite what your story and your contribution is. So I'm going on that next trip with you, homie. That's what's going to get me on the plane. Take me to Puerto Rico or Chile. If not, I'm not going nowhere.
I had a good conversation with my homie, Rod Stars from Rebel Diaz.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I was like, brother, like, if not now, when? It's like it's a call of duty. Like this is the time for us to show up. If there was ever a time to be present and like use all the North American privilege that we have accumulated as people of color living in a first world country, it's now. Because our brothers and sisters have taken up arms, right, to free the people and create a new country. Like we got to show up and support. This isn't about like us being a leadership role. This isn't about us going there and telling people what to do. No, this is about asking people, how can we help? And then like figuring out like what our role is, and I have that clear. I have no problem going into a space and being led by a 27-year-old or a 30-year-old, right, who is in the thick of it, right?
Oh,
and I think like revolutionary change is where you constantly have to look at yourself, and you constantly have to be like in the cyclical space of like, how are we doing? Having conversations, right? Revolution is not about achieving one plateau and staying there and saying, you know what, we've gotten here, and this is how it's gonna be. No,
Right.
I think for like our generation that's like gotten older, in the movement, right? Like we need to continue to learn from young people. We need to engage them in conversation, right? Because we're also elders, but we also need to be open to new ideas for engagement, right? And looking at these relationships as being vital of keeping, like the movement going, right? And that is something, that I've always, like held to my heart. I recognize, like the importance of the late Richie Perez, like Iris Morales, like Panama, all the folks that came before us who, created a space for us to be equal, for us to like enter spaces and like be part of conversations. And now I get it. Now that I'm in their age group, like I see the value and the importance, right? And those are those lessons, right, that I think I hold on to dearly, right? You always have to, yeah.
No, I agree 100. And also that, like we said, movement is constant, or the struggle should be constant, but also the way you show up changes.
Yeah.
It just changes. When we were 25, we could probably run 40 blocks or 50. Some of us can't, most of us can't anymore, or that might not even be our role anymore. And for us, and for people of our generation, I think it is critical that we understand that that's why we have elders in the movement. It's not like Panama and Iris and all our elders alive that aren't incarcerated. They're doing the work. They just shift how you show up, or now we have more resources to be able to be like, oh, I could support homie in doing this or somebody doing that because I can't be in the streets right now, or I should be in the streets, but I should be on the sidewalk making sure the young people that we're listening to them, following them. So yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, I seen everything what y'all were posting on Instagram, but the beautiful capturing the women, young people being very clear, and as well as the military and the current president is being pretty clear that they're going to keep up with repressive tactics. Now, that 3,000 number that you spoke of earlier, is that how many people are currently jailed right now that have come out of this over 14 months?
So over a 14-month process, right?
Sorry, everybody, internet connection is a little spotty.
So think of it like this, right? Everybody who took to the streets, right? There were casualties. Over 40 people perished. There were all the people that were tortured, and there were all the people that were detained. And one of the things that like the movement didn't fight hard enough for was the amnesty of the people who were really political prisoners. And I think that right now, like, there's a sentiment that like, in order for us to move forward, we got to free them and we got to give them amnesty. However, right, how the system is. Once the vote for a new constitution was approved, it happened on the verge of the summer months coming. So people got a little complacent, right? The constitution was approved, the summer's coming, let me just chill a little bit. And some people kind of forgot about the brothers and sisters, right, on the front lines that were detained. So right now, the post-constitutional vote movement is to free everybody, right? And we're not going to let go of the streets until all of them are freed, right? And when they are free, they need to build statues of them. And they need to get rid of all the colonial Spaniard images of these white men. And they need to put the statues of like the everyday working class people who fought and gave their lives for this, And that's why filmmaking is important, because if history is not going to treat them correctly, then there are independent filmmakers who can do that. And all we're doing is we're telling a part of the story, right? And we need more people to do that. And remember, people, it's not about putting the camera on yourself, right? It's about putting the camera on the community, right? And making observations,
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time and as well as letting me show some of the movie. I mean, like I'm whatever y'all need. I'll help as much as I can. I'm happy that you were able to go there. I mean, and just like also it's your people, there's always going to be a little extra special thing. If I'm going to Puerto Rico, you're going to Chile, it's like, yo, my people are that dope. We are dope. That's why they come at us and been coming at us since you were before you were even born, what they did to your family, so many other families under Pinochet, but really at the direction too of United States imperialism. So I really encourage like folks, if you don't understand intervention by this country in Latin and Central America, you're missing a big portion of why this exists still to this.
And I gotta tell you, I gotta shout out all the people who are doing work in Puerto Rico. And while I was in Chile, I was in communication, like with Eli and some of the folks who are doing film work out there, right? And like I know that things don't happen in a vacuum. And it's like important for us to just be in constant communication, right? Again, we're not in competition, right? There are things that I saw in Puerto Rico that were really exciting, right? I saw how like the trans, like the Black and brown trans community came out and became part of the frontline movement in Puerto Rico almost immediately, right? And I'm like, all right, like I need to have that in the back of my mind. So when I'm having conversations with people in Chile and they know that I have a relationship to folks in the Caribbean, right? To make sure that those stories come out, right? And make sure that people know that they're not alone. And for that, we need to be in constant communication, not in competition with each other, right? So
Right.
Thank you for having me on the show. And thank you for having more than one Chilean on the show, because I know you had other folks on it, and that's the point. Like,
Chileans are my best friends.
I don't need to be the go-to in Chile for everything, and I don't want to be that person. I can put you in contact with like many people, and I'm sure that you'll take me up on that.
I will take you. Exactly. No, I'm so glad you were able to come on. Everybody, sorry about the spotty Wi-Fi, but look, if you're not in the Northeast right now, this cold is like, I know you're cold, but like I said, I think it just dropped to below 12 up in here in Albany. But thank you everybody for rocking with us. Go check out V and all the incredible he does. Follow him on Instagram. V, I'll see you soon. I'll talk to you sooner. Thank you so much. I love you, homie. Love you, comrade. Thank you for all the work you've always done for us. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate y'all. So thank you for joining me as I talk to V. Go on his Instagram to follow him. Thank you for rocking through the rough parts of the interview. It is what it is, but everybody stay safe, wear masks, If you're in the Northeast, it's all right. Stay home and binge some political documentaries, not just Netflix. All right. Peace, everybody. Thanks for joining.